Welcome to the Radical Responsibility Revolution podcast. This is where we are transforming lives, inspiring you to reclaim your health, your wealth, and the power of your mind. Here we share actionable insights, inviting you to turn inwards and design your life of purpose and abundance. Welcome back to another episode of Radical Responsibility Revolution. And today's guest is one of those women whose presence quietly stops you in your tracks. Becky Curran is a woman who has lived through experiences that would have shattered many, and instead she chose to alchemize them into purpose, voice, and service. Becky learned early that the world would try to define her by her appearance before she ever had a chance to speak for herself. She followed the right path, like we all do: marriage, motherhood, only to experience an unimaginable loss, and we'll get into that, when her infant son passed away due to a preventable medical tragedy. What followed was not just grief, but a profound reinvention. So today, Becky is a speaker, she's an advocate, and a changemaker, committed to telling the truth about disability, about motherhood, about mental health, about medical advocacy, and what it really means to reclaim agency as a woman. Yes. Her work bridges lived experience with courageous leadership, reminding us that our stories, especially the painful ones, are often the very medicine the world needs. This is a conversation about loss, voice, identity, and radical responsibility, not as blame, but as power. And I am so deeply honored to welcome you, Becky, to this podcast because you have just such a beautiful, inspirational story. I always ask my guests, how are you serving the world in this moment? Because we're going to talk about your story and how you got to where you are. What is your superpower that you're bringing to the world right now?
Think resilience, not
Ah,
letting
yeah.
anything knock me down.
Yeah. And you've been through some things that could knock you down 100%.
Yeah.
I love the idea that you have such a great story about your child. And I want to talk about how, though, all of that story, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the story, how did that transform you into the person, especially from a woman's point of view of who you are today? What are the things that are different about you today that you had to go through all of those things that you went through?
I think as time has gone on, I've worried less and less about what other think of people think of me. Sometimes I worry a little bit about what I think other people think of me, which funny enough are two different things, but I have really tried to lean into my identity and my strength and hope that it can help others as I am open and vulnerable about sharing my story. I want others to be reminded that they're not alone. And sometimes people come up to me and say, "Oh, I had this thing happen to me, but I know it's not as bad as what happens to you." And I like to stop people in their tracks and say, you know what? A challenge is a challenge, and we all are equipped to handle challenges in different ways. I don't want you to downplay the challenge that you faced. I want there to be a level playing field. And as someone with physical disability, which is dwarfism, before even facing these adult life challenges that could have broken me, I have constantly had to adapt to challenges, but I don't want people to feel bad for me. I just want people to give me a chance to participate in society in an equal and meaningful way.
Yeah. I asked you this question on the pre-call because it's my view of the world is that anybody that has a difference in them. I don't even like the word disability because it infers that there's some kind of something different that is insurmountable, that you want to be treated just like the human being that you are. And that to me is the most important thing for all of us to understand, is that anybody that's got a challenge in their life, because sometimes our challenges are visible, and like mine, I have no rectum. You can't see it, but it's still a challenge. And people that have maybe a celiac disease or something where we can't see our challenges and called maybe a disability. So I want you to talk about that from the perspective of You are a human. You are a woman. You are a mother. You have these qualities that have nothing to do with whether you call it a disability or dwarfism, because I never saw you as that. When we first talked on the Zoom, I just said, this is an amazing human being. I don't see any of that, but I know that you have lived with it. So talk about it, how you've lived with it, how you actually were leading with it for a portion of your life, but now you're leading with being a woman. I know that's a big question, but I think it's important to understand how you've navigated all of this and how you show up today.
It was funny when I was in college, I had to write an essay for one of my classes, and it was all about identity. And I talked a lot about my identity as a person with dwarfism. And my professor looked at my report and said, "That's just a piece of who you are. There's more to who you are." And she encouraged me to rewrite the narrative. And it really got me thinking that she's right. That's just a small piece of who I am. And then about probably a decade later, I was in New York City and I was at this event. It was related to some harassment that happened in Santa Barbara, California. It was like a Twitter talk where people were reading quotes that women had mentioned during this time. And it was at that event where I felt, oh man, I can relate. Like I really have not spent enough time leaning into my woman identity and all that comes with that, in addition to the dwarfism and disability identity. So I felt that that event, which is now over a decade ago, was when I really started thinking differently about how to present myself. And then, of course, I took the life path of uh, dating, getting married, having a child, losing a child, and now really wanting to share my son's legacy because I don't think it was fair that he only lived for 6 months and 21 days. And I am constantly leaning into that motherhood woman identity and have found myself relating to women around the world who may not have ever lost a child, but can't imagine losing a child and just feel the need to connect. Of course, I've also met people who've experienced horrible tragedies, which led to losing children, but it's a topic that is not talked about enough. And I feel that I need to continue to lean into it more and be vulnerable. Even just the other day, I posted something on LinkedIn related to this time of year, which is very challenging for me because it's a month before my son's accident. So on Google Photos, which I choose to look at, it says on this day 4 years ago, and I'm constantly reminded that we're getting closer to the time where he was no longer here. And that post had a lot of comments and support because I wanted to bring truth to the fact that we don't know when we have a month left. We don't know when we have a day left. We need to realize that we're all here for a short period of time and there need to be fewer barriers and we need to learn how to be kind and accept each other more for how we show up.
Yeah. I love that you are talking about the things that you started to do, just like we all have been taught. We all got the playbook, get married, have kids, do the career, whatever our version of that was. And so your beingness in your body is not that. It is being a woman because you got all of those downloads, just like we all get them. So I think it's so beautiful that you speak to that from a perspective of we are all just the same as women. We get that same playbook. And as you said, we never get a guarantee because as mothers, we never can count on the fact that our children aren't going to leave us before we go. So I want you to share how this has really transformed you with this story of your child dying because it's so poignant and yet it is so profound how you have transformed that to help other women. It's just beautiful.
I have someone who helps me a few times a week just as I continue to regain my physical mobility and taking care of myself. I kind of went in the full 360 circle of caring for my son I am honest about the fact that even the first 6 months of his life were not easy. There were some medical challenges that we have to stay on top of, and I wouldn't do anything more than want to have him here on Earth still. But uh, it was definitely mother caregiver role, doing whatever I can to make sure that he has what he needs to be strong. And after losing him, I ended up losing my ability to walk. It probably was about a year and a half time frame after he passed. And of course, the grief that I experienced from losing my son probably did not help my body and mobility. But I went through a surgery, and while I was going through surgery, I was on a long road to recovery and decided to end my marriage. And now I'm in a place where I require outside help that I pay for in order to continue to keep things going and rebuild my life. Lately, I've spent a lot of time on my own, independent, by myself, reflecting, trying to figure out what rebuilding means to me. And I know that if I went back a few years and my son was still here and if I was still married, I would have company every weekend. But it's facing that truth that it's my decision to figure out how I want to live the next several decades of my life. And I've been intentional about letting go of the noise, those things that get in the way of making me feel happy and find joy. And even though there are moments and there are times where I'm reminded of the tragic loss of my son, I constantly think about how would he want me to live? And I never think, oh, I need a rush to get to heaven with him. But I do think about, oh, someday that'll be nice to reunite with him. I did have a terrible fear of death before my son, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and think about it all the time. And after he passed, I wake up in the night, but I'm thinking of other things. So it's no longer a huge fear of mine, but it doesn't mean that I'm rushing to get there. So I think that itself and the fact that I held my son dying in my arms for 2.5 hours really makes me realize that there's nothing I can't handle.
Yeah.
And I think it's made me stronger, but it's also trying to get the world to understand that I'm up for more challenges. Just because I've faced all of this tragedy, I want people to give me a chance to show up and
Mhm.
show up stronger because of what happened.
Mhm. You just, I'm so struck by the story of this commonality that we as women have, because there are many women on the planet that have lost their children to death and other reasons. And it puts such a strain on a marriage, which it did in your case. That is something that is very common, especially when there's grief involved. And so just sharing your feelings about this, and so other women can hear this, number one, on a podcast or whether you're standing on a stage speaking to them. To me, this is so beautiful that you have this. It's a gift now. You've transmuted this, you've alchemized this grief and this pain. And I understand that it's not completely rewired, because grief has its own timetable. And yet you, when you started in the beginning, your word was resilience. You just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So where did that come from? Where did that ability for you to just stay with it? Because so many people would just give up. Literally.
Think I'm very fortunate to have had a very strong support system from my upbringing, which continues to now. I have a very close relationship with my parents and my sister, who always believed in me and prepared me for the outside world, because there was going to be noise in the outside world and people who tell me that I can't do things or I shouldn't try that or this. And they kept encouraging me to try those things. And it's okay if I fall and I can get back up. And if I fall, it'll make me stronger when I get back up. And that has been really helpful, because if I didn't have that support system, I think things would be different. I am also committed to setting goals that I promise myself to follow through with. So over the
Mhm.
past year, I made sure that I worked really hard on building more physical strength beyond what was offered to me in physical therapy, from my surgery to the rehab to outpatient therapy. I was discharged from outpatient therapy about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years. And if I had stopped building physical strength then, I would have been in a much different place. So I took up boxing recently. I started setting goals for one
Mhm.
mile races and 5Ks. I'm
Wow.
not a runner by any means, but for me,
Mhm.
it's from start to finish and working on staying committed to those goals. I am overdue to schedule my next one, but it's just moving forward and just moving and building as much strength as possible. I also live with the idea that anything could happen to my spine and the fusion that I have and years to come where there could be further complications. But I need to live in the right now and build as much strength as possible and know that I always did the best I could to recover. And hopefully it helps prevent future problems. But there's a lot of unknown. And I think living with that unknown is almost like living with the notion that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And I got to live in the now and do the best I can each and every day. My dad always said to me, I can be sad one day, but the next day I got to get back up and try again. And that is instilled in me. And I'm also a product of my environment. So if I'm around people who bring down the energy, I want to make sure that I do not surround myself with those people because my energy will be brought down. And that's probably another reason why I've spent a lot of time on my own lately, because I want to be intentional about who I surround myself with going forward, because time is limited and I want to find more joy than sadness.
Yeah. I think this is so important for people to hear. You are the walking definition of what this podcast is about: radical responsibility. You take that every single day for your own life. It isn't about you blaming anybody, because this was a preventable death of your son. And that could just absolutely destroy someone. And you have turned it around in a way that you are using that to help other women. So I want to talk about some of the people that you have touched their lives through your talks, through your speaking, through anything that you do to outreach to the world. I want you to share some of those stories of how they have been impacted by you, because I know that people listening to this will be impacted, and I just want spotlight some of those.
Yeah, so there was someone who reached out to me a few months ago. Her daughter was in the hospital and she decided to speak up when she realized that something was wrong. And that prevented further complications at the hospital. So by sharing my story and my son's story, I am able to help others learn to, if you like they say in the New York subway system, if you see something, say something. So you want to speak up if something doesn't seem right. And I find joy in that because I know that it can help save lives.
Hmm.
I went to Kenya about 13 years ago and did a speech on International Day of People with Disabilities. And there was someone who sent a text to the person that I was speaking with because they were a resident of Kenya. And they said, I'm so glad that you and your friends got on TV and shared your story. I had lost hope, but now I no longer feel that way. And I no longer want to end my life. And that's a deep one. So some of the lighter ones are just you changed my perception of people with
Hmm.
disabilities or people with dwarfism. I learned so much. Next time I go up to someone who's like you, I will have a conversation rather than be fearful, rather than pull my children away from them. I'll encourage them to embrace the conversation and learn something. One
Hmm.
time after one of my speeches, someone came up to me and said, I'm about to marry into this family, and there's going to be three sons that I didn't have before. What if we come up to a little person and they're not as approachable as you are? And I told her, you're already getting in your own way. Anyone may not be approachable, but why don't you give them a chance? And if for some reason the conversation doesn't seem to be going anywhere, you can end it. But don't be afraid to have the conversation before the situation even happens.
Hmm.
So really my goal in life in general is to share the hard things that I've gone through with hopes that if others have to experience those same challenges, they're reminded that they're not alone and that there's a path built before them. Another big piece of what I advocate for is inclusion in the workplace because I struggled to get my first job. I sent out 1,000 resumes, went on 100 interviews over the course of 4 months. Every time I walked in the door, I was judged based on my appearance. I wish, looking back, that I had the courage to ask those interviewees what I could have done better, but I didn't have that courage early on in my career. And it's possible that I didn't show up to the interviews as put together as I could have been, but nobody told me. So, of course, I was under the assumption that it was just because of my dwarfism that I didn't receive the job offer.
Very good point. I love the idea, though, that you are just an advocate, not just for dwarfism, because that's a version of you, but that you're an advocate for people that do just look different in general. Because we
Mhm.
can show up in the world and walk into a room. Like I do this myself sometimes. I feel like I'm kind of schlubby, and that's an internal dialogue. That isn't the truth. But if we don't accept our own internal power, which is what you're standing in your power now, then we send that into the room before we even walk in. So talk to all of the women in the world right now and give them your best wisdom of how to let some of that go because you are just a brilliant role model for all of us, especially women, of don't let who you are on the outside in any way, shape, or form be what leads when you walk into a room.
I think it's important on both sides to know what room you're walking into, and
Sure.
are you going to be able to give your best foot forward because it's an opportunity that you're super passionate about? Because I think that can be seen super fast if you don't seem passionate about what you're going into. But with that aside, you need to go in knowing that you're bringing your very best self. And if there's something that is not allowing you to be your very best self, find a way to communicate that. And maybe it means postponing the opportunity, but you want to know that you show up to something doing your very, very best. So then you have the best opportunity. And if the opportunity doesn't turn into what you hope it does, there are other opportunities out there. And rejection can be scary, but it can allow you to find your next opportunity, which has the potential to be even better.
Exactly. I always say everything's working in our favor, and sometimes when the door shuts, it feels like there isn't another one to open up. And talking about rejection, you know better than anybody about rejection because you worked in the entertainment business. So that is just fraught with rejection. So talk about that a little bit of how you maybe it gave you a thick skin. Maybe you just got that resilience from there. But share a little bit about what that was like, just so that people can understand. You've had so many multifaceted versions of your beingness, and that one is interesting because of the rejection part. We all have been rejected a little bit, but nothing like what that industry does.
I think so. I will admit that the entertainment industry is perceived as glamorous in an industry that everyone's curious about and wants to be a part of. So I had that going against me in addition to the challenges of traditional interviews. So I soon found out after going on all the interviews and having a few temporary placement assignments before my first permanent job that other people without any visible disability had struggles getting those jobs, unless you have a family member who allows you to be grandfathered into the opportunities. I joke because my first temporary to permanent job was at a major talent and all of the assistants parked on the low level of the parking garage, and there were some really nice cars. And I was wondering how the salary matched up with really nice cars, but you just go with it. You're just happy to be there and you show up and do whatever it takes to be there. But the tasks that were required were some interesting tasks, even though you're not signing up to be a personal assistant. There were definitely some of those things that didn't make sense that were part of the job requirement. But I had faced all of those interviews. Looking back, I kind of wished I had just put that I had dwarfism on my resume. So then really I'd be walking into rooms where they knew to expect it, but I also had the chance of having fewer than 100 interviews. And what would that lead to? Would it take longer? There were so many what ifs. So going back to that experience, I think I learned from every interview. I maybe shouldn't have scheduled up to 4 interviews a day driving around in Los Angeles traffic because it definitely meant that I wasn't put together for every single interview, probably exhausted and frustrated. But I did it. I survived. I eventually found employment. And the reason I wanted to work in the entertainment industry was that there are only 65,000 people with dwarfism in the US and about 1.5 million worldwide. That means every room I walk into, most likely at least 75% of the people in the room have not met or seen a person with dwarfism in real life. And their perceptions come from the media. The entertainment industry tends to perceive us as elves, leprechauns, fictional characters that they can laugh at, and there aren't enough human sides to our identity portrayed in the media. So I wanted to figure out how to change that. And I knew that working in the industry, I needed to show that I was a hard worker first. No one was going to listen to me and my priorities and passions right away. And after about 4.5 years, people did start asking me because I had put my time in. And they said, "What is it you're passionate about?" And I said, "I'm passionate about changing what we see in the media because it affects how people like me are treated in society." And I was given a platform to host a panel discussion with people with and without disabilities in front of and behind the camera, talking about the challenges. About 160 people from around Los Angeles showed up, really passionate about advancing this work. And I did intentionally choose to include all people with disabilities beyond just dwarfism, since it's such a small population. And from that, I started doing storytelling on Facebook and Twitter, disability in media, changing perceptions, showing people with disabilities doing things out in the world, like sports and things that others can relate to. One event I went to, we were talking about a deaf adult and a deaf boy was there, and he said, "I didn't know that deaf people become adults." So people want to see themselves represented, or they don't think that their future is possible or that there is a future for them. And that's what's really powerful about that industry that continues to draw a lot of attention. But it has the ability to influence and change lives in a positive way if the platform allows for it. And there's still a long way to go. I was on a panel recently with the Gina Davis Institute, and the percentages are still very low. About 3% of roles in Hollywood describe disability, and less than 20% of those 3% are actual actors with disabilities playing those roles. So then you have people who act like they think people with dwarfism are versus those who actually know what it is to live with dwarfism. And that's another reason why I had mentioned how I expanded dwarfism identity to disability identity. Now I'm really passionate about not just the entertainment industry, but every industry. How do we bring more
Mm.
awareness to the value that people with disabilities and people with dwarfism can bring to society?
I can just tell you, you're a rock star. You just don't let anything get in your way. And you just keep going. And that resilience is what you lead with. And you are such an inspiration to every human on the planet to say, okay, how can I be of service? Whatever's going on for me, how can I bring awareness to the world so that this is not what people think? And you're right, the media plays way too big a role in everything. I'm just saying, I'm just in love with you because I really feel like your energy is just so brilliant and you really are a rock star. So
Thank you.
I want to talk about what is your best wisdom that you would give to all of the women listening about taking their own agency, because that's what you do. You just own your agency. You're just like, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to share. This is how I'm going to advocate for people that are like me. But also, it isn't just the dwarfism. It isn't just the disability. It's being a woman. It's being a mom. It's having a child die unexpectedly. You just are the whole package. And so, what is the best wisdom that you would give to women that they could take away for 2026 about stepping into their own agency?
I'd say be yourself and don't try to be anyone else. And if
Hmm.
those around you aren't okay with you being yourself, reevaluate who you surround yourself with.
Yeah. That's so key. And what you said about your family being such a support for you and that you spending time and being intentional so that you're not around negative energy, that is so key because we are who we have, as Robin Sharman said, we are who we have coffee with. And if we want
Mhm.
to uplift ourselves and improve who we are, we can't hang around people that don't support that, that are bringing our energy down. So, I always ask my guests to connect with their future self. So if you would just close your eyes for a second and let your future self come and give you some wisdom that you can impart to us. So she's got a message for all of us, and she wants you to bring that forward for 2026 and let us know what that deep wisdom is because you're going to be her soon enough and bring that forward to let us all know what the wisdom of your beautiful Becky future self is telling you to share with us. And when you're ready, you can tell us.
Take that leap and chase your passions.
Mm, that's
I
so
have a lot of
beautiful.
things in the works, and I think there's just the stalling part of it because we're all getting in our own way sometimes. And I think there's a lot of potential if I just take a leap and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. So, how would somebody reach out to you if they wanted you to be a speaker at their event or at their conference or at their association to
Yes,
talk about
so
this?
on social media, I'm Becky Motivates. It's kind of all my handles across social channels. And you can always reach out to me at beckymotivates@gmail.com.
Okay. And all that'll be in the show notes. So I would say this is just you are the speaker that everybody should be looking for this year in 2026 because you are the whole package. You have so much wisdom to share with us. And as I said, from the moment that I first started talking to you, I was so inspired because you just keep going. And that to me is the definition of radical responsibility. You embody it every day, Becky. And I really, really am so grateful that you blessed us with your wisdom and your presence today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.